Evelyn Hartman had spent her entire life building a family. But inside her own California mansion, she was slowly being destroyed by the one person meant to care for her. While her son traveled the world for business, her daughter-in-law, Victoria Hale, tightened her grip, controlling her meals, her medicine, and even her freedom. No one knew the truth, except the housekeeper who watched the abuse grow darker by the day. And soon, everything was about to break. Evelyn Hartman had lived long enough to witness both the rise and collapse of fortunes, to bury a husband she adored, and to see her only child become one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in the state. At 79, she should have been enjoying a peaceful retirement in her sprawling Greenwood Hills mansion, an elegant, sun-washed property nestled between hills of eucalyptus and winding private roads. Outsiders imagined her days were filled with gentle routines, slow mornings on the patio overlooking the garden, afternoons reading by her bay window, evenings spent sharing warm conversations with family. To anyone driving past the gated entrance or seeing her name in the society pages, it was easy to assume Evelyn lived a life of comfort. What no one realized was how drastically that life had changed in just under a year. Her daughter-in-law, Victoria Hale, had moved into the house with a polished image that fit perfectly into the neighborhood. She carried herself with the poise of a woman accustomed to high standards and higher expectations. Andrew's colleagues often described her as charismatic, poised, and relentlessly supportive of her husband's career. At social events, Victoria appeared to be the ideal caretaker, helping Evelyn walk down steps, adjusting her sweater when the breeze picked up, gently reminding her of small details when age caused brief lapses of memory. Everyone admired her dedication. Everyone believed she was devoted. And Evelyn, during those first months, believed it too. Then Andrew began traveling more, taking contract negotiations in Europe and Asia, visits that expanded from a week to 2, then to nearly a month. He called constantly, morning, noon, night, and every time he asked if his mother was comfortable, Victoria answered before Evelyn even lifted the phone, assuring him that everything was under control. She said Evelyn was napping, or resting, or feeling a bit tired. She was just stepping out of the shower, or taking her medicine, or not feeling up to talking. The excuses were effortless, well-timed, and strategically delivered. Andrew, often exhausted and juggling multiple time zones, never questioned them. The shift in the household began subtly. Evelyn used to enjoy small freedoms, choosing her breakfast, deciding when to get dressed, watering her roses in the backyard. But gradually Victoria inserted herself into every decision under the guise of helping manage Evelyn's health. She claimed new dietary restrictions were essential. She insisted the doctor wanted her to regulate Evelyn's schedule more strictly. She adjusted dosages, swapped medications, and began handling Evelyn's pill organizer. The first time Evelyn noticed her morning tea tasted different, she assumed it was simply a new brand. The third time her hands trembled afterward, and she knew something was wrong. Victoria remained unfailingly pleasant whenever Andrew called, but once she ended the call, her expression cooled into something harder. Evelyn began to recognize that looked the way Victoria's eyes assessed her like a problem waiting to be solved. Small criticisms became daily routines. She ate too slowly, moved too slowly, asked too many questions. Victoria would sigh, claim she was tired from caring for an elderly woman all day long, and remind Evelyn how grateful she should feel. The tone grew sharper, the patience shorter. The mansion, once a place filled with warm lighting and the faint scent of jasmine candles, took on a different atmosphere under Victoria's rule. Curtains remained drawn longer. Doors that had always remained open were now shut. Even Evelyn's favorite armchair, the one by the window overlooking the lemon trees, seemed to lose its comfort as the days dragged on with a heaviness she couldn't name. She felt unwelcome in her own home, like a guest overstaying her visit. Victoria controlled the thermostat, insisting Evelyn needed warmer conditions for her circulation, even though the air grew stifling at times. She replaced Evelyn's soft meals with nutrient drinks that tasted metallic and unfamiliar. When Evelyn questioned them, Victoria smiled too widely and said she was only following the doctor's guidance. Yet Evelyn couldn't recall ever discussing these changes with Dr. Carter. That alone unsettled her, but the foggy feeling in her mind after each drink unsettled her more. The only person who noticed the diminishing spark in Evelyn's eyes was Rosa Martinez, the housekeeper who had served the Hartmans for over a decade. Rosa had watched Evelyn recover from the death of her husband, seen her celebrate birthdays, host charity dinners, and laugh with Andrew during late-night movie marathons. She knew Evelyn's habits, her rhythms, her personality, and she recognized immediately when something about the elderly woman began to fade. Evelyn's smiles lasted shorter. Her steps grew unsteady. She constantly looked over her shoulder before speaking, as if afraid of being overheard. Rosa witnessed things that made her stomach twist, Victoria yanking Evelyn's arm a little too roughly, scolding her for leaving crumbs on the counter, taking away her phone with the excuse that Evelyn kept misplacing it. Rosa once found Evelyn sitting at the kitchen table long after dinner, staring at a glass of water as if unsure whether she was allowed to drink it. When Rosa gently asked if she needed anything, Evelyn simply shook her head and whispered that she didn't want trouble. The worst moments came after Andrew left for a 6-week business trip to Germany. Victoria's patience evaporated the second the airport car pulled away with him inside. Her tone sharpened, her rules tightened, and her control intensified to a degree that even Rosa hadn't anticipated. If Evelyn woke too slowly, Victoria complained. If Evelyn hesitated while taking her pills, Victoria raised her voice. And when Evelyn asked if she could call Andrew just to hear his voice, Victoria's expression darkened, and she told her it was best not to disturb him with minor issues. Days blurred together as Evelyn grew weaker, both physically and mentally, from the constant monitoring and the questionable medications that Victoria insisted were necessary. Her body felt heavy, her thoughts foggy. She lost track of hours, sometimes even full days, which frightened her more than any harsh word Victoria had thrown at her. She had always been sharp, always remembered details, birthdays, anniversaries, yet now she felt her mind slipping in ways she couldn't explain. Rosa watched all of it building like a slow storm. She tried to intervene in small ways, serving Evelyn extra fruit, stepping between her and Victoria's harsher comments, sneaking her small comforts like warm tea with honey. But Rosa knew these small acts were not enough. Something darker was happening behind the polished facade of the mansion, something that would eventually go too far if no one stepped in. And Rosa, with every passing day, became more certain that if anyone was going to protect Evelyn Hartman, it would have to be her. Victoria Hale had a talent for performance, and no stage suited her better than the polished floors and curated elegance of the Hartman mansion. Whenever Andrew called from overseas, she switched into her flawless persona with unnerving ease. Her voice brightened, her gestures softened. She became the picture-perfect caretaker, speaking gently about how his mother was adjusting, how she was doing her best to support Evelyn's health, how the house was running smoothly. She always sounded compassionate, never stressed, never overwhelmed, never irritated. If Andrew asked to speak to his mother, she responded with expertly crafted excuses. Evelyn was napping. Evelyn had a mild headache. Evelyn had just taken her medication and shouldn't be disturbed. Andrew rarely questioned these explanations. His schedule was suffocating, and calls with Victoria always ended with him feeling grateful that she managed things back home so gracefully. The moment the call ended, however, Victoria's demeanor changed. Her features sharpened, her posture tightened, and her voice lost its sweetness. She moved through the house with calculated authority, acting like someone who had earned full command of the household. She inspected rooms not out of care, but out of suspicion, checking for anything Evelyn might have touched or moved without her permission. She disliked unpredictability, and Evelyn's occasional attempts at independence irritated her more than she let on. What bothered Victoria most was that Evelyn still had moments of clarity, flashes of awareness that pierced through the haze of the pills. During these moments, Evelyn questioned things. She asked about her medication, asked to call her son, asked why she couldn't eat regular meals anymore. Victoria always responded with irritation masked as concern, insisting that Evelyn simply didn't remember what the doctor had said. She used the elderly woman's uncertainty as both shield and weapon. And whenever Evelyn pressed further, Victoria's voice grew cold, reminding her that she should be grateful anyone bothered taking care of her at all. Little by little, Victoria increased her control. She installed new locks on certain cabinets. She replaced Evelyn's vitamins with stronger pills that she claimed were doctor-recommended. She removed the spare phone from Evelyn's nightstand, telling her she had misplaced it, then hid it in the master closet under a box of handbags. She restricted Evelyn's access to the backyard, citing fall risks, even though Evelyn had walked those paths for years without issue. She began managing all incoming mail, telling the postal carrier to leave everything in a locked delivery box that only she had the key to. Even Rosa noticed that letters for Evelyn, especially those from old friends, seemed to vanish before they ever reached her. Victoria preferred not to raise her voice, but when she did, it was sharp enough to make Evelyn flinch. She blamed the elderly woman for everything: misplaced items, untidy rooms, minor spills on the counter. She complained that Evelyn's forgetfulness made life difficult. Some days, Victoria spoke harshly from morning to night, venting frustrations that had nothing to do with Evelyn at all. And because Evelyn had already begun doubting her own memory from the medication, she internalized the blame. She apologized constantly, even when she couldn't remember what she was apologizing for. The transformation in the house didn't escape Rosa's notice. She saw the way Victoria tightened her ownership over every decision. She saw the way Evelyn's confidence weakened, her shoulders curving inward as if she wanted to disappear. Rosa respected boundaries, but her instincts nagged at her. She had known Evelyn long enough to see when something was wrong. She had worked in wealthy homes before, but she had never encountered a caretaker whose presence made the house feel suffocating. One afternoon, Victoria confronted Evelyn because she had walked down to the kitchen before breakfast was served. Evelyn simply wanted a glass of water, but Victoria treated it like a deliberate act of rebellion. She cornered her near the refrigerator, speaking in a tone low enough that Rosa couldn't hear the words, but sharp enough that Evelyn's hands trembled. After the scolding, Evelyn returned to her room, closing the door quietly, as though hoping her existence might go unnoticed. Victoria's manipulation grew more sophisticated. She positioned herself as the only one capable of caring for Evelyn. She told neighbors that Evelyn was declining rapidly. She hinted that Evelyn's mind was slipping, even though Gerard Carter had never given such a diagnosis. She spread these stories with calm concern, never sounding malicious, always seeming heartbroken by Evelyn's supposed deterioration. People who didn't know Evelyn well believed every word. Even a few who knew her began to wonder if age had finally caught up to her. The lies formed a protective shell around Victoria, shielding her actions from scrutiny. The more she convinced others that Evelyn was frail and confused, the easier it became to excuse the strange restrictions she imposed. It also made Rosa's life harder. If she questioned Victoria's behavior, Victoria could simply dismiss her as someone who didn't understand medical care, or worse, accuse her of interfering with Evelyn's treatment. Rosa felt trapped between protecting her job and protecting Evelyn. With each passing week, Victoria grew bolder. She adjusted Evelyn's medication schedule without consulting Gerard Carter. She cut Evelyn's meals in half, claiming she lacked appetite and needed lighter portions. She recorded a few videos of Evelyn during moments of fogginess, moments caused by the very medication Victoria had given her, and showed them to Andrew to reinforce the illusion that Evelyn was mentally slipping. Andrew, thousands of miles away, felt helpless and guilty. He trusted Victoria's judgment because she always provided what looked like evidence. He didn't realize that everything he saw was intentionally manufactured. The cruelest part of Victoria's plan was how she blended control with occasional kindness to keep Evelyn off balance. One day she brought Evelyn a soft blanket she claimed she bought just for her comfort. Another day she brewed her a cup of chamomile tea and sat with her for 15 minutes, pretending to listen. But the moment Evelyn relaxed even slightly, Victoria found something to criticize. The blanket was left folded incorrectly. The tea wasn't finished fast enough. The conversation wore her out. The kindness was never real, it was simply another method of control. Rosa gradually started documenting what she witnessed. She didn't want to accuse anyone without proof. She recorded audio of raised voices. She wrote down dates, times, and details. She quietly saved medication she suspected weren't prescribed. It wasn't courage that drove her, it was fear. She feared that if she didn't act, something worse would happen to Evelyn. She feared that Andrew would return one day to find his mother gone and never know the truth of what had been done to her. The tension in the house intensified until every day felt like a countdown to something inevitable. Victoria ruled the mansion like a general overseeing a vulnerable prisoner. And Evelyn, who once walked confidently through the halls she owned, now moved hesitantly, as though each step might provoke punishment. The more Andrew remained abroad, the more severe Victoria became. And with no one else willing to speak up, Rosa carried the weight of knowing that Evelyn Hartman was living under a threat no one else could see, no one except her. Rosa Martinez had always been the kind of woman who worked quietly, efficiently, and without complaint. She moved through the Hartman home with the familiarity of someone who had spent over a decade polishing its surfaces, preparing its meals, and witnessing its private moments. She knew where Evelyn kept her gardening gloves, which china set she preferred for afternoon tea, and how the older woman liked her towels folded in thirds rather than half. Rosa knew these things not because she memorized them as duties, but because she genuinely cared about Evelyn as if she were a family member, which made it all the more agonizing to see her decline so abruptly under Victoria's supervision. Rosa's awareness didn't come all at once. It started with tiny inconsistencies, details so subtle that anyone unfamiliar with Evelyn might have overlooked them entirely. She noticed Evelyn's walk becoming unsteady, but not in the typical way one expects from advanced age. It was a slow, dragging heaviness, the kind that didn't match Evelyn's normal rhythm. Then there were the moments when Evelyn paused mid-sentence, as if trying to gather thoughts that slipped just out of reach. Rosa had seen elderly people experience forgetfulness before, but never with such sudden intensity. And then there were the mornings when Evelyn's hands trembled while holding her teacup. Even though she'd always had remarkable steadiness for a woman nearing 80, Rosa tried to attribute these changes to stress or fatigue, but as the days passed, she couldn't ignore the pattern. It wasn't random. It wasn't natural. Something was happening, and the timing aligned too perfectly with Victoria's increased control over Evelyn's meals, medications, and daily routines. The first moment Rosa felt genuine alarm happened during a Tuesday morning breakfast. Evelyn sat at the table in her light blue robe, staring at a smoothie Victoria had insisted was doctor-approved. The drink was greenish, thick, and unappealing, and Rosa watched as Evelyn lifted the glass with visible reluctance. She barely drank half before coughing softly and placing it down. Rosa approached immediately. "Mrs. Hartman, are you feeling all right?" Before Evelyn could answer, Victoria appeared behind her like a shadow stepping into the sun, her tone sharp and reprimanding. "She's fine, Rosa. Don't make a big fuss. She's been picky about her food lately." Rosa kept her expression neutral, but the way Evelyn's shoulders tightened told her everything. Victoria wasn't just managing her, she was controlling her through fear. Over the next week, Rosa began paying closer attention. She started documenting Evelyn's symptoms in a small notebook she kept tucked in her apron pocket. Shaking hands, sudden fatigue, disorientation. A look in her eyes that didn't belong to the Evelyn she knew. Rosa also recorded changes in the household dynamics. Doors that had never been locked before now required keys. The medicine cabinet in Evelyn's bathroom had been reorganized, with several bottles unfamiliar to her. The meals were no longer balanced and warm. Instead, Victoria served Evelyn strange supplements, flavorless soups, and processed shakes she claimed were gentler on the stomach. Rosa knew enough about caregiving to recognize that a drastic change in medication or diet can wreak havoc on an older body. But she also knew that Evelyn had never needed any of these so-called treatments before. She remembered the conversations Evelyn once had with Durer. Carter routine checkups, mild blood pressure issues, manageable aches. Nothing ever suggested she needed heavy medication. Yet day after day Victoria insisted on new schedules and new doses, always too defensive when Rosa asked innocent questions, always shutting down any feedback. One afternoon, Rosa heard raised voices coming from Evelyn's room. She paused outside the partially closed door, reluctant to eavesdrop but unable to walk away. Evelyn's voice broke through, first thin, anxious, pleading. "Please, Victoria, I don't want to take any more today." Victoria's response was cold enough to chill the air. "You retaking it because I said so. Don't make this harder." A moment later, the door slammed. When Rosa stepped into the hallway, Victoria emerged with her usual flawless composure, giving her a glare that warned her not to interfere. That night, Rosa couldn't sleep. She lay awake in her small room beside the laundry area, listening for any unusual sounds. At midnight, she heard soft footsteps and a faint whimper. When she peeked into the hallway, she saw Evelyn pacing slowly, her breathing unsteady, her eyes dazed. It looked like she wasn't fully aware of where she was. Rosa rushed to her gently, helping her back to bed. "Do you want me to call Dr. Carter?" she whispered, Evelyn gripped her hand weakly. No, Victoria said not to bother him. She said he thinks I'm losing my clarity. Rosa felt a wave of anger rise in her chest. She knew Dr. Carter would never say such a thing. The next day, Rosa discreetly checked the trash bin outside the master bathroom. Beneath tissues and cotton swabs, she found a partially torn label from a prescription bottle. The name on it wasn't Evelyn's. It wasn't even from Dr. Carter's office. Rosa didn't recognize the prescribing doctor at all. Her heart pounded. She knew Evelyn was being given medication, but now she suspected the drugs weren't legitimate. She placed the label into her notebook. Her suspicion grew into certainty when she noticed something else. Victoria had started watching her more closely. If Rosa lingered near Evelyn's room too long, Victoria appeared out of nowhere, asking if she needed something. If Rosa entered the kitchen earlier than usual, Victoria asked why she wasn't following her regular schedule. It became clear that Victoria understood Rosa was paying attention. But that didn't stop Rosa. In fact, it made her more determined. She started pretending to be less aware, acting more forgetful or distracted so Victoria wouldn't take her seriously. Meanwhile, behind that facade, Rosa gathered knowledge of dates, times, conversations, patterns. She saved bits of leftovers Victoria prepared for Evelyn, intending to bring them to someone who could analyze them later. She noted every unusual medication, every strange drink, every bruise on Evelyn's delicate arms. The hardest part for Rosa was seeing Evelyn begin to believe Victoria's narrative. The elderly woman became more hesitant when speaking, more doubtful of her own memory, more fearful of doing anything that might upset Victoria. Once, when Rosa brought a warm breakfast to Evelyn's room, the older woman whispered, "I don't want her to get angry. Please, Rosa, don't let her know." Rosa's heart broke hearing that. She promised Evelyn softly, "I won't let anything happen to you. I'm watching out for you." Evelyn squeezed her hand, a fragile, trembling squeeze that said more than words could. In that moment, Rosa understood she wasn't just witnessing abuse. She was standing at the threshold of something far more dangerous. Victoria wasn't just controlling Evelyn. She was isolating her, weakening her, preparing her for something Rosa couldn't yet define but sensed with rising dread. And Rosa, more than anyone else in that house, understood that if she didn't gather enough proof, and soon Evelyn Hartman might not survive whatever Victoria had planned next. Victoria's control over Evelyn tightened in ways that felt almost surgical. What had once been subtle adjustments to her schedule evolved into rigid rules that dictated every moment of Evelyn's day. Breakfast had to be consumed at a specific hour, even if Evelyn felt nauseous from the morning medication. The pills themselves were no longer offered casually. They were placed into Evelyn's hand with the insistence of a warden managing an inmate. Victoria claimed she was following doctor's orders, yet the only doctor Evelyn ever trusted, Dr. Carter, hadn't stepped foot in the house for months. Victoria made sure his calls never reached Evelyn, steering conversations with carefully rehearsed excuses that prevented him from suspecting anything. The most controlling shift came in the form of personal freedoms being quietly taken away. The back doors leading to the garden were always locked now, and the windows, once a source of fresh air and sunlight, were often drawn shut. Victoria replaced Evelyn's soft room lighting with harsh white bulbs under the pretense that brighter light was better for her vision. But the effect was the opposite. Of the glare caused Evelyn's eyes to sting and her head to ache. When she mentioned this, Victoria dismissed her with an irritated sigh and said she was imagining things. Even simple household items began disappearing. The old landline phone Evelyn kept beside her bed was gone without explanation. Victoria claimed it must have been misplaced, then assured her she didn't need it because she, Victoria, would handle everything. Evelyn's planner, a floral, covered journal filled with years of dates, personal notes, and comforting reminders, suddenly vanished. When Evelyn asked about it, Victoria accused her of leaving it somewhere ridiculous and suggested that losing items was a sign of declining awareness. Evelyn didn't argue. Her confidence had been chipped away so steadily that she no longer trusted her own recollection. The medication was the worst part. The pills made Evelyn feel heavy, foggy, unsteady. She struggled to remember words, lost her balance easily, and sometimes woke unsure of what day it was. Rosa noticed the pattern immediately. She'd find Evelyn sitting on the edge of her bed, breathing slowly, trying to steady herself while her hands twitched slightly. Rosa offered water, a warm towel, or simply a reassuring presence. Evelyn would always try to smile for her, but the wariness in her expression told Rosa more than Evelyn ever said aloud. Rosa confronted Victoria once, asking why Evelyn needed so many new medications. Victoria's response was smooth, almost practiced. She rolled her eyes and said Evelyn had developed age-related anxiety, insisting that the pills were prescribed by a specialist who understood these conditions. When Rosa asked why Dr. Carter wasn't involved, Victoria dismissed the question and said his old-fashioned methods weren't good enough anymore. Rosa left the conversation shaken, more convinced than ever that Victoria was lying. The dynamic between Evelyn and Victoria had shifted from caregiver and patient to something far more sinister. Victoria monitored how much Evelyn ate, how long she showered, and even how long she spent in the bathroom. She criticized Evelyn for moving too slowly, for asking the same question twice, for needing help down the stairs. She labeled these struggles as behaviors rather than symptoms, as though Evelyn was intentionally being difficult. One particularly difficult afternoon, Evelyn tried to take a walk through the living room to stretch her legs. She'd been feeling stiff and dry. Carter had always encouraged movement, but when Victoria found her halfway to the sliding doors, she flew into a rage disguised as exaggerated concern. She grabbed Evelyn by the elbow, scolding her for wandering without supervision. The grip was firm enough to leave faint marks on Evelyn's arm, marks Rosa noticed later when she helped her change into a clean blouse. Evelyn tried to hide the bruise, but Rosa had seen it immediately. That was the moment when Rosa began recording short audio clips on her old phone whenever she sensed tension building. It wasn't much, just muffled conversations, raised voices, or the sharp tone Victoria used when correcting Evelyn, but Rosa felt it was better than having nothing. Her intuition told her that things were escalating. That bruise wasn't an isolated incident, it was a warning of what might come next. The household atmosphere grew heavier each day. Victoria moved like someone guarding a secret, checking doors twice, locking cabinets, keeping her phone always on silent, but within reach. She had lists, folders, and printed forms stacked inside the office. Rosa overheard her on several phone calls with a man who spoke in a clipped, professional tone. Their conversations were short, tense, and often ended with Victoria saying something about timing or finalizing everything. Rosa didn't understand what any of it meant. She only felt dread settle deeper in her stomach. The baths became another form of control. Victoria insisted the water had to be hot because it was good for circulation, but the temperature bordered on scalding. Evelyn tried to protest, but Victoria dismissed her objections as exaggerations. Rosa noticed Evelyn's legs afterward, red, tender, and clearly irritated from the heat. Victoria claimed it was normal and even accused Evelyn of being dramatic. Rosa knew better. Elderly skin was delicate. No responsible caretaker would force such conditions on someone in Evelyn's fragile state. Rosa considered calling Andrew many times, but Victoria monitored every outgoing call and had made it clear that she handled all communication in the house. If Rosa tried anything, Victoria would know. And if Victoria knew, she could retaliate not just against Rosa but against Evelyn. That was Rosa's greatest fear. The fear that paralyzed her each time she stood by the phone in the laundry room, hesitating to dial. She understood the danger Evelyn was in, but she also understood that one wrong move could push Victoria into something even more damaging. Victoria frequently reminded Evelyn how dependent she was. "You need me," she would say in a voice that sounded almost like comfort, but carried a threatening undertone. "Without me, you'd fall, forget your medication, or worse." She repeated these lines so often that Evelyn began absorbing them as truth. She questioned her own ability to do anything independently. When Rosa tried to encourage her, Evelyn visibly hesitated, glancing toward the hallway as if expecting Victoria to appear. The final indicator that something had shifted beyond mere control came when Rosa delivered dinner one evening. Evelyn sat at her vanity, staring into the mirror with a faraway expression that frightened Rosa. When Rosa gently touched her shoulder, Evelyn flinched before relaxing. Rosa asked softly, "Are you okay, Mrs. Hartman?" Evelyn's response was quiet, fragile. "I don't know what's happening to me, Rosa. I feel like I'm disappearing." Those words haunted Rosa long after she left the room. They confirmed what she had suspected. Evelyn wasn't just being controlled, she was being stripped of her autonomy, her dignity, her awareness, and perhaps even her safety. Victoria wasn't caring for her. She was weakening her, preparing her for something Rosa couldn't fully understand but sensed was dangerously close. The house that once felt warm and lived in had become a place of tension, fear, and manipulation. And Rosa, the only witness with enough clarity to recognize what was happening, knew the situation was nearing a breaking point. Something would have to change soon. Someone would have to act. And deep down, Rosa understood that she was the only one who could step forward before the damage became irreversible. Rosa's growing awareness of Evelyn's deterioration made her hypervigilant, tuning her senses to every sound in the house, every shift in Victoria's routine, and every tremor in Evelyn's hands. She had always seen herself as an employee dedicated, loyal, respectful, but never imagined she would become the only line of defense between a vulnerable woman and someone determined to break her down. The fragile balance of the household kept tipping further each day, and Rosa sensed that something monumental was approaching. It began with patterns the way Victoria handled Evelyn physically, the tone she used to discipline her, the strange concoctions she served in place of real meals. At first, Rosa tried to believe there were explanations. She simply didn't know medical instructions, dietary changes, doctor recommendations that hadn't been explained properly. But those justifications grew harder to believe when she saw how Evelyn reacted whenever Victoria entered a room. The older woman tensed, her posture shrinking slightly, as though her body anticipated discomfort before anything was said. Even her voice changed when speaking to Victoria, quiet, brittle, uncertain. Rosa realized Evelyn had begun apologizing for everything. She apologized for taking too long to walk down the hall, for dropping her fork, for forgetting which pills to take, for leaving blankets unfolded, for simply waking up feeling tired. These weren't normal apologies. These were the apologies of someone conditioned to fear consequences. One afternoon, Rosa brought laundry to Evelyn's room and discovered her sitting in her armchair, staring at her hands. When Rosa asked if she was all right, Evelyn hesitated before whispering, "I'm scared of upsetting her." The admission tightened Rosa's chest. It wasn't the words alone, it was the defeated tone, as if Evelyn no longer believed she deserved comfort. The shift became more pronounced as Evelyn grew weaker. Victoria's demands increased and her impatience intensified. If Evelyn forgot a detail Victoria had told her earlier, Victoria treated it as an offense. She made comments like, "You were lucky I do so much for you," or "You wouldn't last a day without me," delivering them in a tone that pretended to be sympathetic but carried an unmistakable edge. Rosa recognized the manipulation immediately. She had seen similar dynamics growing up, caring for family members who endured emotional abuse. But this was different. This was calculated. Victoria wasn't just venting frustration, she was grooming Evelyn into complete dependence. Rosa first came to understand the full extent of Victoria's severity during a late afternoon incident near the stairwell. Evelyn had tried to walk downstairs on her own because she wanted some fresh air in the living room. Her movement was slow but determined. Rosa watched from the end of the hall, ready to help if needed, when Victoria appeared suddenly, heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She rushed toward Evelyn with a force that seemed disproportionate to the situation, scolding her for putting herself at risk. Her grip on Evelyn's upper arm was firm enough to make the older woman wince. Victoria didn't apologize or release her. Instead, she tightened her hold and snapped, "Do you understand how irresponsible this was?" Rosa's instinct was to intervene, but she couldn't risk escalating the situation. She waited until Victoria stormed off before helping Evelyn sit down. The older woman rubbed her arm quietly, eyes lowered. From that day on, Rosa watched even more intently. She noted the way Victoria stood too close to Evelyn, placing her hands on her shoulders or arms with what looked like guidance but felt more like restraint. She noticed how Victoria would block doorways, forcing Evelyn to alter her path. She overheard harsh phrases spoken under the guise of tough love and saw the growing fear in Evelyn's expressions whenever Victoria announced a new rule. The meals grew worse as well. Instead of serving the warm, nutritious dishes Rosa had prepared for years, Victoria replaced them with bland shakes and powder-based soups. She claimed real food was too heavy for someone in Evelyn's condition. The portions became absurdly small, barely enough to sustain a child, let alone an elderly woman needing strength. Rosa found herself slipping extra snacks to Evelyn whenever Victoria wasn't paying attention: sliced fruit, soft bread, a scrambled egg, but even then, Evelyn hesitated, as though worried they'd be caught. Once, when Rosa brought her an apple sliced thinly, Evelyn whispered, "Please don't let her know. She'll say I'm overeating." The bathroom routines were another point of concern. Victoria insisted on controlling the water temperature, which she set dangerously high. Evelyn emerged from these baths red, skinned and shaky, clutching a towel around herself as if she had endured something unpleasant rather than relaxing. Rosa once placed her hand under the faucet immediately after Victoria left the room and recoiled. The water was nearly scalding. When Rosa confronted her, asking if the temperature could harm Evelyn, Victoria shot back that Rosa was stepping outside her role and that medical advice outranked domestic opinions. Rosa didn't push further, but she documented it in her notebook. One morning, Rosa discovered Evelyn's bedroom door locked from the hallway side. She jiggled the handle in confusion, whispering, "Mrs. Hartman." The faint reply from inside, frail and frightened, shook her deeply. When Victoria walked by moments later, Rosa pointed out that Evelyn's door was locked. Victoria casually said it was for Evelyn's safety, claiming she had wandered at night and nearly fallen. But Rosa had been awake late the night before, sorting laundry in the hallway, and had heard no such movement. The explanation didn't add up. Victoria's behavior suggested she was keeping Evelyn confined rather than protecting her. Rosa's determination to intervene grew with each passing day. She began strategizing, considering the safest way to contact Andrew. She couldn't call him from her personal phone, because Victoria checked the call logs on the household line and frequently walked past Rosa during breaks. If she used the kitchen landline, Victoria would hear it from any room. If she stepped outside to make a call, the security cameras facing the driveway and garden would catch her movements. Rosa needed a window of opportunity, a moment when Victoria was distracted long enough for her to act. That opportunity nearly came one afternoon when Victoria left for an appointment. Rosa rushed upstairs to check on Evelyn, only to find her curled up on the bed, exhausted and pale. They spoke softly about how Evelyn felt, and Rosa urged her to consider talking to Andrew directly. But Evelyn shook her head fearfully. "She said it would upset him," she murmured. "She said he has too much stress already." The thought that Evelyn believed that hurt Rosa deeply. Victoria had turned Evelyn's love for her son into another tool of control. Rosa knew then that she couldn't rely on Evelyn to call for help. She would have to be the one to reach out, even if it meant risking her job or worse. She began memorizing Andrew's overseas number, so she wouldn't need to access Evelyn's missing planner. Each day she looked for openings, listening for Victoria's car engine fading into the distance, watching for moments when Victoria showered or ran short errands. Every time she almost acted, something disrupted her plan. But instead of discouraging her, it fueled her determination. Because every day that passed, Evelyn seemed to lose more of herself. Her world had shrunk from a spacious mansion to a maze of restrictions, controlled by one woman's cruelty. Rosa couldn't let that continue. She wasn't sure how or when, but she knew the moment to help Evelyn would eventually arrive, and when it did, she had to be ready. Rosa's instincts had sharpened to a degree she had never known before. Each morning when she arrived in the kitchen to begin her tasks, she paused for a moment, listening to the atmosphere of the house. Some days she heard Victoria moving briskly through the hallways, giving orders to no one in particular, opening and closing cabinets as if conducting an invisible inventory. Other days, the house felt weighted, as if it were holding its breath. Those were the mornings when Rosa feared the most for Evelyn, because they often followed nights when she had heard uneasy footsteps or faint rustling upstairs, signs that Evelyn had trouble sleeping or was suffering from the effects of whatever pills she had been forced to take. Rosa had now filled almost half her notebook with observations: Evelyn's shaking hands after meals, the way her voice faltered whenever Victoria addressed her, the bottles with labels torn too neatly to be accidental, the forced baths, the locked doors. She had written down dates, details, conversations, even the times when Victoria claimed to have spoken to doctors Rosa had never heard of. All of this was evidence, but Rosa didn't know whom she could safely share it with. She considered calling Dwyer Carter directly, but he had already been shut out once ever Victoria would easily discredit any attempt Rosa made to involve him. She thought about calling the police, but what would she say? That a wealthy woman was being cruel to her mother-in-law. Without proof of immediate danger, They might treat it as a domestic misunderstanding and walk away, leaving Evelyn even more vulnerable. Still, Rosa kept gathering information. One of the most disturbing changes she noticed was how Evelyn's mental clarity fluctuated dramatically. Some days she was alert enough to recognize familiar faces and recall old memories. She'd ask Rosa questions about her children, or talk about her late husband, or comment on the weather outside. On those days a spark remained in her eyes, a flicker of the woman she had once been. But on other days, Evelyn's gaze was glassy and unfocused. She sat in her chair staring at nothing, her hands curled loosely in her lap, breathing shallowly. Rosa learned to read the signs, the unevenness in Evelyn's speech, the moments when she seemed to forget she wasn't alone, and the heavy exhaustion that settled over her after taking Victoria's pills. Once, Evelyn tried to stand up too quickly during one of these foggy spells and collapsed onto the carpet. Rosa rushed to her side, helping her sit upright again. Evelyn blinked slowly and whispered, "I don't know why I feel like this. I don't feel like myself anymore." Rosa's heart clenched. She wanted to tell her exactly why she felt that way. But she couldn't risk frightening her further, not when Evelyn was already so fragile. Instead, she stroked the older woman's hand and said, "You're not alone. I'm watching out for you." Evelyn nodded faintly, as if trying to believe it. The more Victoria isolated Evelyn, the more Rosa recognized how intentional it was. Evelyn used to receive occasional visits from neighbors, old friends, and even distant relatives. But those visits had dwindled to nothing over the past several months. Rosa discovered why when she overheard Victoria on the phone with one of Evelyn's acquaintances, telling them that Evelyn was too tired for visitors and not up for long conversations anymore. Victoria's tone was breezy and polite, the kind that made people trust her instantly. She framed it as concern, but Rosa knew it was another tactic to ensure Evelyn had no outside contact, no witnesses to her decline. No one to question the story Victoria was constructing. Even Andrew had begun to believe Victoria's narrative. During his calls, he often asked Rosa how his mother was doing, but Rosa could never answer honestly. Victoria hovered nearby like a shadow, listening closely to every word. So Rosa kept her responses vague. "She's resting," she'd say, or "she's having a calm day." Andrew always sounded tired, grateful for the reassurance. He never questioned why his mother wasn't able to speak with him directly. That was what tore at Rosa the most. Andrew loved his mother, but he trusted Victoria too completely, unaware of the quiet storm building in his own home. Rosa had one particularly vivid moment of clarity about how deeply Evelyn was being controlled when she noticed how Evelyn flinched at the sound of footsteps approaching her room. It didn't matter whether the footsteps belonged to Rosa or Victoria. Evelyn's body reacted the same way, tensing as though preparing for reprimand. Rosa hated seeing that reflex, but it proved how deeply the psychological pressure had settled into Evelyn's mind. This wasn't just physical manipulation. It was emotional conditioning. One afternoon, Rosa caught a glimpse of the mirror in Evelyn's room and saw the older woman studying her own reflection, as if trying to recognize something she had lost. When Rosa approached, Evelyn asked, "Do I seem different to you?" Rosa hesitated, then said gently, "You going through something difficult, but you still you." Evelyn considered this for a long moment, then whispered, "I feel like parts of me are slipping away. Like I'm fading." The words gave Rosa a sense of urgency she hadn't fully acknowledged until that moment. Evelyn wasn't just deteriorating, she was being stripped of her independence piece by piece. Victoria's methods were becoming more forceful as well. She corrected Evelyn more harshly, handled her more briskly, and controlled her schedule with military precision. Rosa heard her reprimand Evelyn for walking too slowly, eating too little, eating too much, asking questions. Not asking enough questions. Anything could be turned against her. It was as though Victoria needed to break down Evelyn's resistance completely, to shape her into someone pliable and unquestioning. Rosa didn't yet understand why, but she sensed a larger motive beneath the cruelty. Victoria wasn't harming Evelyn for no reason. She was preparing her for something. Evelyn's body began showing the effects of the stress and medication. She moved stiffly, her joints aching more than usual. She became increasingly sensitive to temperature changes, shivering under blankets even in the warm California afternoons. She had moments of lucid fear, asking Rosa quietly, "Is something happening to me?" Rosa always reassured her, but inside she felt the pressure building. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She was part of the story, part of its consequence. Each new symptom deepened Rosa's determination. Evelyn wasn't hallucinating her decline. She wasn't just aging. She was being weakened systematically, intentionally. The house felt suffocating in a new way, and Rosa realized she could no longer keep waiting for the right moment to act. The danger was escalating, and Evelyn was slipping into a state where she might soon be unable to recognize what was happening to her. Rosa knew that if she didn't take action soon, Victoria would push Evelyn past the point of recovery. Whatever Victoria was planning, whatever final step she was preparing for, felt closer with each passing day. And Rosa, holding her notebook of evidence and watching Evelyn struggle to stay grounded, understood that she had reached a breaking point. She couldn't observe anymore. She had to intervene. She had to find a way to bring Andrew home, or bring the truth to him before Evelyn's strength faded completely. Rosa noticed the turning point on a Thursday afternoon, a day when the Hartman household felt more tense than usual. Victoria had grown increasingly irritable over the smallest things, snapping at inconsistencies only she could see. Pacing through rooms with restless agitation, as though she were waiting for something important to happen. Rosa sensed the mounting pressure like a shift in atmospheric weight before a storm. She moved carefully through her chores, trying not to provoke Victoria, but also keeping track of every detail in the shifting landscape of the home. She had reached a stage where observation had become a reflex, almost a profession within a profession. That afternoon Evelyn seemed more disoriented than ever. Rosa found her in the upstairs hallway wearing one slipper, her robe hanging unevenly from her shoulders. She was staring at a painting of the old Hartman vineyards, as if trying to remember what it represented. Her eyes were tired and slightly glassy, and she didn't notice Rosa until her name was spoken twice. When she finally responded, her voice was faint, as if she had been startled back into her body. Rosa helped her sit on the edge of the bed and offered her water, but Evelyn shook her head slowly, whispering, "I think I'm too tired." Rosa knew Evelyn wasn't genuinely tired, she was over-medicated. It had become clear that the pills Victoria gave her weren't simply sedatives. Whatever they were, they altered Evelyn's senses, slowed her thoughts, and left her powerless to navigate even the simplest parts of daily life. Victoria insisted it was all part of a specialized treatment plan. Rosa knew better. She saw the patterns, the manipulation, and the unmistakable signs of someone being chemically controlled. The change in Evelyn was too severe to ignore. But what pushed Rosa from concern into urgent action was discovering that Victoria had begun preparing paperwork in the study. Several times a day Victoria locked herself inside with folders, legal documents, and long phone calls spoken in a hushed voice. Rosa overheard words like authorization, facility intake, final step, and power of attorney. She didn't understand everything, but that the tone alone was enough to warn her that something irreversible was being planned. Victoria wasn't just controlling Evelyn's health. She was preparing to take control of her entire life and possibly remove her permanently. On that tense Thursday, Rosa heard a sound she had never heard before, Evelyn raising her voice. It was faint, wavering, but unmistakably distressed. Rosa paused outside the bedroom door to listen. Evelyn pleaded, "Please, not again. I don't feel right after those." Victoria's voice followed, sharp, firm, and chillingly calm. "You need to take them or you'll get worse. Don't argue. This is for your own good." The argument was brief, but the impact on Rosa was profound. She had always known Victoria was forcing medication on Evelyn, but hearing the older woman resist and hearing Victoria overpower her so quickly ignited something fierce inside Rosa. This was no longer only about notes in a journal or discreet observations. This was about protecting a woman who could no longer defend herself. Later that evening, Rosa attempted to check on Evelyn again, only to find the knob stiff. The door had been locked from the hallway. She leaned in, whispering Evelyn's name. She waited, hoping for response, but all she heard was a faint rustle and uneven breathing. Rosa felt her stomach twist. The idea that Evelyn was trapped inside her own room filled her with dread. Victoria had not even attempted to hide the act. She locked the door as if it were a perfectly normal thing to do to an elderly woman. When Rosa asked Victoria about it, she received a rehearsed explanation about night wanderings and preventive safety measures. Rosa knew it was a lie. Evelyn barely had the strength to walk across the room, let alone wander the house at night. That night, Rosa stayed awake longer than she intended, sitting on the edge of her bed and listening to the faint sounds coming from upstairs. She heard Victoria opening drawers, moving things around, and walking back and forth with a rhythm that suggested planning rather than routine. Rosa held her phone in her hand, debating whether to call Andrew using the number she had finally memorized. But fear stopped her. Not fear for herself, but fear of making the situation worse for Evelyn. Calling Andrew without proof might prompt Victoria to retaliate, and Evelyn, in her current state, couldn't withstand more stress. The next morning, Rosa made a discovery that forced her hand. While cleaning the study, something she was rarely allowed to do anymore, she found a stack of documents pushed partially under the desk. The papers looked official, stamped and formatted in a way that suggested legal weight. She scanned the headings and felt chills run up her arms. They included terms like exclusive decision authority, long-term care transfer authorization, and medical consent override. One of the forms included Evelyn's shaky signature, barely legible, uneven, clearly signed under duress or sedation. Rosa covered her mouth as she read paragraph after paragraph outlining how Victoria would gain control over all decisions related to Evelyn's health care, finances, and living arrangements. Rosa had seen enough. She tucked the papers back exactly as she found them and walked out of the study with her heart pounding. For the rest of the day, she worked mechanically, her mind racing with the enormity of what she had discovered. If she didn't act now, Victoria would soon have legal power to take Evelyn anywhere, control every aspect of her life, and silence anyone who tried to intervene. Rosa no longer had the option to hesitate. She had reached the line where doing nothing was equal to participating in Evelyn's suffering. The moment she decided to act came late in the afternoon, while Victoria was in the master bedroom, getting ready to leave for an appointment. Rosa wiped down the kitchen counter with shaky hands, her pulse fluttering at her throat. This was the moment she had been preparing for without fully realizing it. She waited until she heard the front door close and the hum of Victoria's car engine fade from the driveway. Then she rushed upstairs to Evelyn's room. Her hands trembled as she unlocked the door using the spare key she had discovered weeks earlier hidden in the back of Andrew's old desk drawer. When she opened the door, Evelyn was sitting upright in bed, her expression dazed. The room was warm, too warm, and the air smelled faintly of chemicals from the pills Victoria used. Rosa kneeled beside the bed and took Evelyn's hand gently. "I need to ask you something important," she said softly. "Do you trust me?" Evelyn's eyes filled with confusion, then slowly softened. "Yes, Rosa," she whispered, "I trust you." That was enough. Rosa helped her to the edge of the bed, steadying her as she stood. The effort was exhausting for Evelyn, but she clung to Rosa's arm, leaning heavily yet willing to follow. Rosa knew they had a small window of time before Victoria returned, and she needed every second to prepare. Her plan wasn't fully formed yet, but she knew the first step: she had to get help. Real help. Help that Victoria couldn't intercept or discredit. She was going to call Andrew. But this time it would be her voice he heard, not Victoria's version of the truth. And she prayed he would listen before it was too late. The house felt different the moment Victoria's car disappeared down the driveway. It wasn't freedom, at least not yet, but there was a rare window of possibility, a gap in Victoria's rigid control that Rosa knew she had to seize. She supported Evelyn carefully as they moved through the hallway, each slow step reminding her of just how fragile the older woman had become. Evelyn leaned heavily on her, breathing in shallow, uneven bursts. Even though Rosa had seen her declining daily, noticing it now in such close proximity made the urgency of their situation sink even deeper into her chest. Every tremor in Evelyn's fingers, every wobble in her stance, every quiet expression of fear only strengthened Rosa's resolve. Rosa helped Evelyn down the hallway and into the small sitting room near the stairs, a room that Victoria rarely entered. That alone made it safer. She eased Evelyn into a cushioned chair, making sure she was comfortable, before stepping toward the landline mounted on the wall. Her heart pounded as she lifted the receiver, half expecting Victoria to burst through the front door and snatch it away. But the only sound in the house was the soft hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the distant ticking of a hallway clock. Her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed Andrew's international number from memory, a sequence she had repeated silently so often in the past week that it now felt etched into her muscle. With each ring, Rosa felt the weight of the risk she was taking. If Andrew didn't answer, she didn't know what her next move would be. She could try again. She could try calling Jute or Carter. She could even try calling the police and hope they believed her. But she needed Andrew first. He was the only person with both the authority and emotional investment needed to intervene immediately. On the fifth ring, she almost lost hope until she heard his voice, groggy and confused. "Hello, who's calling?" Rosa nearly cried with relief. "Mr. Hartman, it's Rosa. I need to tell you something about your mother." There was a silence on the other end, the kind that stretched with tension rather than emptiness. When Andrew finally spoke, he sounded alert. "Rosa, why are you calling from the house? Where's Victoria?" The question alone revealed how deeply he trusted his wife to handle every detail. Rosa swallowed and took a deep breath. "She's out. And your mother, sir, you need to listen. She's not well. Not the way Victoria has told you." She could hear Andrew shifting, the rustle of sheets, the subtle change in his voice. "What do you mean not well?" "Victoria said she's weak but stable." Rosa's words spilled out faster than she intended. She explained the changes she had witnessed, the excessive medication, the forced meals, the isolation from friends, the disappearing items, the locked doors. She described Evelyn's trembling hands, the confusion in her eyes, the sudden collapses, the repeated protests about the pills, and the bruises from Victoria's grip. Every detail she had held inside for months emerged as though pressure had finally broken through the surface. She expected Andrew to interrupt, to question her, to ask if she was exaggerating. But he remained quiet, listening as though the truth forced him into silence. When Rosa paused to catch her breath, she heard him release a slow exhale. "Rosa, are you sure?" His voice was strained, caught between disbelief and dread. She answered firmly. "Sir, I wouldn't call you unless it was serious. I've worked for your family for years. I care about your mother, and I am telling you she is not safe with Victoria." Something in her conviction must have reached him, because the next thing she heard was urgency replacing doubt. "Put my mother on the phone, please." Rosa helped Evelyn lift the receiver with both hands, steadying her arms. Evelyn's voice was faint, but when she heard her son's voice, something inside her flickered back to life. Mom, can you hear me?" Evelyn closed her eyes tightly as if relief alone might overwhelm her. "Andrew, sweetheart," she whispered, her breath uneven. "Something is wrong here." The strain in her voice must have shattered whatever remained of Andrew's trust in Victoria. "Mom, tell me what's happening." Evelyn's eyes brimmed with tears. "I don't feel right. She gives me things, food, pills, I don't remember hours sometimes. I can't think clearly. I'm scared." Rosa listened to Andrew's breathing on the other end. It wasn't disbelief anymore. It was anger, fear, and realization colliding all at once. "Rosa," he said abruptly, his tone sharper, more decisive. "Keep her safe. Don't let her take anything else Victoria gives her. I'm coming home." Rosa felt her heart hammer with relief and dread at the same time. "When will you be here?" she asked. "As soon as I can get on a plane. I'll call you when I land in the States." Before she could respond, Evelyn's breathing hitched and Rosa quickly took the receiver. "She's tired," Rosa said softly. "But she's okay, I'll keep watch." Andrew hesitated only a moment before saying, "Thank you, Rosa. Don't leave her side. I mean it." After the call ended, Rosa lowered the phone slowly, her hands still trembling. Evelyn leaned back in her chair with her eyes half closed. The relief of hearing her son's voice had been real, but so had the exhaustion it triggered. Rosa knelt beside her and squeezed her hand. "Andrew's coming home," she whispered. "He knows. You're not alone anymore." Evelyn's eyes fluttered, a weak smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Thank you," she breathed. "Thank you for telling him." But as much relief as Rosa felt, a harsh reality quickly settled over her. Victoria would be returning soon. And if she sensed even the slightest change, if she detected that Rosa had gone against her, or if she noticed Evelyn's behavior shift, everything could unravel. There was no safety yet. They were still trapped in the same house under the control of the same woman who had orchestrated Evelyn's decline. And now, with Rosa's courage plunging her into enemy territory, the risk was far greater. She helped Evelyn back to her room and carefully tucked her into bed. As she brushed a strand of silver hair from Evelyn's forehead, she whispered, "We just need to make it through tonight." Evelyn nodded weakly, her breathing steadying. Rosa stood, checked the hallway windows, and listened for the sound of a car. She had acted. She had taken the critical step that could save Evelyn's life. But the moment Victoria walked through the front door, Rosa knew she would sense that something had shifted, and the hours before Andrew returned would become the most dangerous they had ever faced. The moment Rosa hung up the phone, she felt the weight of what she'd done settle on her shoulders. But beneath that weight lay something fierce and steady. For the first time in months, someone outside the house finally knew the truth. Someone with power. Someone who loved Evelyn enough to take action. Andrew's voice had carried urgency, fear, and anger, but most importantly, commitment. He was coming home, and that fact alone put Rosa in a position she had feared and hoped for in equal measure. Because once Victoria realized the fragile illusion she had constructed was beginning to crack, she would react. And Rosa had no doubt that her reaction would be ruthless. She helped Evelyn into bed and watched over her until her breathing evened out. The older woman looked small and fragile beneath the blankets, her hands loosely folded on her stomach. Rosa brushed a thumb gently over them. The faint tremor remained, a constant reminder of everything Victoria had forced into her system: pills, shakes, restrictions, fear. Rosa didn't want to leave her side, but she needed to prepare for Victoria's return. She needed to plan exactly what she would say, how she would behave, and how she would protect Evelyn if Victoria noticed anything out of place. As Rosa stood in the hallway, listening to the deep quiet of the house, a distant sound snapped her attention downward, the crunch of tires rolling over the gravel driveway. Her breath hitched. She rushed to the top of the stairs and peered through the banister. Headlights washed across the foyer wall. The engine hummed for a few seconds before cutting off. Then came the unmistakable slam of a car door. Victoria was home. Rosa's pulse surged. She wiped her hands on her apron, forcing her breathing to slow. She tried to make her posture look natural, neither hurried nor anxious, as she stepped quietly toward the landing. She had to appear calm, routine, predictable. Anything unusual could alert Victoria instantly. The front door opened, and the click of expensive heels sounded across the tile floor. The familiar metallic jingle of Victoria dropping her keys into the ceramic dish near the entryway echoed through the house. A moment later, the rustle of a shopping bag or perhaps paperwork accompanied her quick, purposeful steps. Rosa descended halfway down the stairs, timing her movement so it would seem like she had simply walked out of the upstairs hallway by coincidence. "Oh, welcome back," she said, her tone smooth, rehearsed. She kept her eyes slightly averted, imitating the cautious respect she normally displayed. Victoria glanced up, her expression unreadable, as if trying to determine whether anything was out of place. "Rosa," Victoria said curtly. "Why are you upstairs?" The question was immediate, cutting, overly sharp for something so trivial. Rosa expected this of Victoria's intuition was almost predatory when it came to detecting shifts in behavior. Rosa kept her voice steady. "I was just checking on Mrs. Hartman. She seemed tired today." Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, studying her face. "I told you not to disturb her unless necessary." Rosa bowed her head slightly, playing into the subordinate role Victoria preferred. "I understand." She was resting. Victoria lingered on the bottom step longer than normal, as though weighing whether to press further. After a tense moment, she moved past Rosa and headed down the hallway toward her study. The click of the study door closing eased some of the tension in Rosa's chest, but not much. She knew Victoria would likely review her documents again. She might realize a paper had shifted slightly out of place. She might sense the air in Evelyn's room felt disturbed. She might pick up on the faint scent of Rosa's lavender hand lotion lingering on the phone receiver. Victoria had an uncanny ability to detect things that most people overlooked. Rosa hurried back upstairs with quiet steps. She didn't want to leave Evelyn alone for too long. When she entered the bedroom, she found Evelyn still half asleep, mumbling incoherently as she tried to adjust her blanket. Rosa approached gently and whispered, "She's home now. We have to be careful." Evelyn's eyes opened just enough to show the exhaustion beneath them. "Did Andrew hear me?" she asked, voice trembling. Rosa nodded. "Yes, he's coming home." Evelyn's lips quivered, not in fear but in relief. "Good," she breathed. Downstairs, footsteps echoed again. Victoria moved through the kitchen, opened cabinets, closed drawers, and walked through the living room. Rosa's instincts told her she was checking the house the way someone checks a crime scene, making sure everything was where she had left it. Rosa pressed a finger to her own lips, signaling Evelyn to stay quiet. Then she moved to the bedroom door and left it slightly ajar so she could hear better. The footsteps grew louder. Victoria was coming upstairs. Rosa tensed. Evelyn clutched the blankets. The measured steps approached the landing, then the hallway, then slowed near Evelyn's door. Victoria's shadow moved across the wall as she passed. Rosa held her breath so tightly it nearly hurt. After a few long seconds, Victoria continued toward her own room. A door opened, then closed. Rosa exhaled shakily. But the danger wasn't over. A few minutes later, Victoria emerged again. Her steps moved toward Evelyn's room with purpose. Rosa shifted into a natural position beside the dresser and pretended to be folding linens when Victoria entered. "How is she?" Victoria asked flatly. She walked to the bedside and stared at Evelyn with scrutinizing calculation. Evelyn's breathing was uneven, but she kept her eyes mostly closed, as Rosa had instructed. "She's resting," Rosa repeated, keeping her voice neutral. Victoria leaned closer to Evelyn. "Mother Hartman," she said softly, "you didn't take your afternoon pills." It wasn't a question, it was an accusation wrapped in a tone that sounded almost disappointed. Evelyn instinctively recoiled, pulling the blanket up slightly. Rosa stepped forward. "She wasn't feeling strong enough today." "I thought," Victoria held up a hand to silence her. "That's not your decision." Her gaze sharpened as it shifted back to Evelyn. "You know you need them. They were keeping you stable." Evelyn's eyes flickered toward Rosa, then away. Rosa felt helpless anger flood her chest, but she didn't dare show it. Her only option was to stall. "Maybe we should wait until tomorrow," Rosa suggested gently. Her stomach seemed unsettled. Victoria stared at her for a long, suffocating moment. "Did someone call today?" she asked suddenly. Rosa froze. Her heart stopped for one instant, long enough that she worried Victoria might hear it. "No," Rosa said, lowering her gaze just slightly to avoid seeming defensive. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something flashed in her eyes, something cold and calculating. She scanned the room one more time, then walked out without another word, her heels striking the hardwood with sharp authority. Rosa waited until she heard the bedroom door close before exhaling again. She turned to Evelyn and whispered, "We can't let her give you anything else tonight." Evelyn nodded weakly. It took all the strength she had. Rosa sat beside her, listening to the stillness of the house, waiting for the next sound that would signal danger. She knew Victoria would grow suspicious. She knew she would double her vigilance. And she knew the next 24 hours would test everything she had left. But Rosa also knew something else now, something far more powerful than fear. Andrew was coming home. And once he stepped through the front door, nothing in the Hartman house would ever be the same again. Night settled over the Hartman house with a heaviness that Rosa could almost feel pressing against her skin. The quiet inside the mansion was deceptive, a quiet that carried tension rather than comfort. After Victoria's suspicious questions earlier, Rosa moved through the rest of her evening routine as carefully as a soldier crossing enemy lines. She wiped counters, folded linens, and prepared tea as if everything were normal, but every step, every movement, every breath carried the knowledge that one wrong gesture could expose everything. Victoria's behavior grew sharper after her brief inspection of Evelyn's room. She prowled through the house like someone searching for a misplaced answer, the click of her heels following an erratic pattern. Rosa recognized the signs Victoria was calculating, sensing something had shifted in her home. She didn't have proof yet, but she had instinct. And instinct alone made her dangerous. Evelyn remained in bed, too exhausted to do anything but drift in and out of shallow sleep. Rosa checked on her periodically, each time adjusting her blankets, brushing her hair from her face, and making sure her breathing stayed steady. There was something different in Evelyn's expression now. Fear still lingered. But there was also a fragile thread of hope. She clung to the knowledge that her son was returning, even though Rosa hadn't told her when. The exact timing wasn't important. The promise alone gave Evelyn something she hadn't had in months. The sense that someone who loved her was fighting to reach her. Downstairs, Rosa heard Victoria making another phone call. Her voice was low and strained, stripped of its usual confidence. Rosa couldn't hear the words clearly from the upstairs hallway, but she understood the tone. Victoria was anxious. Someone on the other end wasn't giving her the answers she wanted. When the call ended with a sharp slam of the handset, Rosa knew trouble was tightening around them. She returned to the kitchen, pretending to prepare tea for Evelyn. When Victoria walked in unexpectedly, Rosa forced her shoulders to relax and adopted the same obedient posture she always used around her. "Mrs. Hartman didn't eat dinner, Victoria said abruptly, her eyes drilling into the back of Rosa's head as she poured hot water into the kettle. Rosa kept her tone even. She wasn't hungry, she felt weak. Victoria crossed her arms. Weak is normal for her. That doesn't mean she can skip meals. Her voice carried a reprimanding reserve, as if Evelyn had committed a personal offense by not eating the bland meal Victoria had forced on her. Rosa turned slightly. I can try offering her some soup again, she said. Maybe later tonight. Victoria's gaze sharpened in suspicion. You reacting strange. The words struck Rosa like a sudden slap. She felt her throat tighten but forced her face into neutral calm. I'm just tired, she replied. It's been a long day. Victoria stepped closer, studying her with an unsettling intensity. Did something happen while I was gone? A cold ripple slid through Rosa's stomach. She knew Victoria's ability to sense shifts in behavior was unnervingly accurate. She met her eyes only briefly before lowering them again. No, everything was quiet. Victoria held the stare a moment longer than necessary. Then, without warning, she brushed past Rosa and opened the upper cabinet. She pulled down Evelyn's pill organizer, the one she had filled earlier that morning. Rosa froze. She watched as Victoria counted each section, each slot, scanning the contents with a calculating focus. When her eyes narrowed at the last compartment, Rosa felt a pulse of panic. Had Evelyn missed a dose? Had Rosa thrown away a pill without noticing? Had Victoria kept a mental count? Rosa wasn't sure, and uncertainty was deadly in a moment like this. Victoria snapped the organizer shut and turned. Don't forget her nighttime medication, she said. Then she returned the box to the cabinet and walked away. But Rosa heard something different in her tone, a combination of irritation and suspicion that hadn't been there before. Victoria was starting to notice cracks. Rosa waited until she heard Victoria retreat upstairs before she quietly opened the pill cabinet. She checked the compartments and found the discrepancy immediately. One of the pills was indeed missing. And not because Evelyn took it. Rosa had flushed it earlier to prevent Victoria from giving Evelyn another dose that evening. She hadn't accounted for the possibility that Victoria would recount them. A wave of dread washed over her. If Victoria realized Evelyn hadn't taken her medication, she might force another dose or worse, attempt to administer something stronger. Rosa hurried back upstairs to check on Evelyn. When she entered the room, Evelyn stirred and squinted at her. Is she upset? Evelyn whispered. Rosa sat beside her and took her hand gently. She's suspicious. But don't worry, we'll get through tonight. Evelyn nodded, though her expression carried worry. Her breathing was labored from stress, and Rosa wished she could lift her out of the house that very second. But they had no transportation, no protection, and no certainty that Victoria wouldn't track them down if they tried to slip out on foot. Rosa remained at Evelyn's side until the older woman drifted back into a fragile sleep. Then she stood and listened to the house. Victoria was still pacing. Rosa needed a plan, not weeks from now, but tonight. She knew Andrew was on his way, but he wouldn't arrive for hours. Too many hours, hours during which Victoria could escalate if she sensed the slightest defiance. She walked back into the hallway just as Victoria rounded the corner. The two nearly collided. Victoria's eyes widened, first not in surprise, but in quick assessment. Were you listening to me walk? She snapped. Rosa stepped back. No, I was just checking on Mrs. Hartman again. Victoria folded her arms, her posture stiff. You rehovering? Why? Rosa felt her heartbeat thundering against her ribs. I'm concerned about her, she said softly. She seemed very weak today. Victoria scoffed. She's always weak, stop exaggerating. She stepped past Rosa and into Evelyn's room. Rosa followed, her stomach tightening. Victoria stood by the bedside, staring at Evelyn with a chilling mixture of resentment and calculation. She looks fine, Victoria declared. She's sleeping. Rosa wanted to scream. She wanted to tell her she was poisoning this woman, destroying her slowly, trapping her inside her own home. But she held her tongue, because speaking out now would only hurt Evelyn. Instead, she stepped closer and pretended to straighten the blanket. Victoria's eyes followed every move. Tomorrow, she said suddenly, we readjusting her medication again. Rosa froze. Why? Victoria smiled without warmth. Because she's resisting too much. I need her calmer. Rosa's breath caught. Calmer meant more sedated, more helpless, more vulnerable. Rosa kept her voice steady. You should talk to Dr. Carter before changing anything. Victoria turned sharply, anger flashing across her face. I know what I'm doing, Rosa, and I don't need your approval. She left the room in a swift stride. Rosa's entire body trembled. Whatever Victoria had planned for tomorrow, the increase in medication, the paperwork in her study, the urgency she had displayed all evening meant that they were running out of time. Fast. She sat beside Evelyn again and whispered, "We just need to make it until morning." But even as she said it, she wasn't sure. Morning felt far away. Too far. And Victoria was already preparing for something that could change everything before Andrew arrived. The hours after midnight were the longest Rosa had ever endured in the Hartman house. Every tick of the hallway clock seemed amplified, echoing through the quiet like a warning. She stayed in Evelyn's room, refusing to leave her side even for a moment. Evelyn shifted occasionally, lost in a restless half-sleep, clutching the blankets with the fragile desperation of someone terrified to wake into the same nightmare. Rosa adjusted her pillows, wiped the perspiration from her forehead, and whispered reassurances whenever Evelyn stirred in confusion. "You're safe," she murmured each time, though she wasn't fully convinced herself. Safety felt too fragile, too temporary, too dependent on variables she couldn't control. Down the hall, Rosa listened to the faint but unmistakable sounds of Victoria pacing again. Her steps moved in irregular patterns, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes stopping abruptly as though she were pausing to think or plan. The creaking floorboards betrayed her movements even when she tried to walk softly. Rosa imagined her standing by the window, staring into the shadows of the backyard, contemplating whatever timeline she had crafted for the next morning. Victoria's ability to anticipate shifts in behavior meant she might already suspect Rosa and Evelyn were holding something back. And someone like Victoria didn't handle suspicion passively. She confronted it, controlled it, crushed it. Rosa tried to distract her mind by planning, replaying the steps she needed to take once Andrew arrived. She needed to get Evelyn out of the house quickly. She needed to hand Andrew her notebook of evidence. And she needed to ensure Victoria couldn't isolate Evelyn again. But every plan depended on time that stretched painfully slow and dangerously thin. Around 2:00 a.m., the house fell into a brief, deceptive stillness. No footsteps, no cabinets closing, no distant sounds of water running. Rosa used the quiet to step into the hallway and listen more closely. She peered toward Victoria's door from afar. The thin line of light beneath it was gone. Either Victoria had gone to bed, or she was sitting quietly in the dark, waiting. The possibility of the latter made Rosa's skin prickle. She slipped back into Evelyn's room and sat beside her again. Evelyn stirred, voice barely above a breath. "Is she awake?" Rosa shook her head slowly. "I don't think so." Evelyn gripped her wrist, eyes fluttering open with a trace of panic. "You shouldn't be here alone. She'll be angry if she finds you." Rosa held her hand tighter. "I'm not leaving you." Evelyn seemed torn between gratitude and fear. Her frail fingers curled into Rosa's palm, grounding them both. Time dragged forward in agonizing increments. Rosa's mind drifted to Andrew, imagining him rushing through airport terminals, trying to board the earliest flight home. She wished she knew exactly when he'd land. The uncertainty gnawed at her. If he arrived too late in the morning, Victoria could execute whatever plan she had been building. The thought made Rosa's stomach twist. Just after 3, a sudden noise jolted her, the sound of glass clinking downstairs. She rose immediately and stood near the door, listening. Another faint sound followed, like someone opening the refrigerator then closing it more firmly than necessary. Rosa exhaled silently. Victoria was awake again, wandering the house. The unpredictability made the night feel endless. Rosa couldn't risk leaving Evelyn now. She was certain that if Victoria caught her doing anything, even remotely suspicious, she would tighten her control in ways Rosa couldn't overcome alone. Nearly an hour later, the unexpected happened. A soft vibration hummed from Rosa's pocket, her phone. Her breath caught. She pulled it out cautiously, shielding the screen from the hallway light. A message glowed across the display, international number, short but urgent, boarded. Landing in 11 hours, stay strong. Rosa felt relief flow through her like warmth after hours in the cold. Andrew was on his way. But 11 hours felt like a lifetime under the same roof as Victoria. Evelyn stirred again, her voice cracking. "Is he safe?" Rosa brushed her hand. "He's coming, and he's angry. That means he's focused." Evelyn closed her eyes, letting the words settle into her like medicine she could trust. As dawn edged closer, the sky shifting from black to a muted, bruised blue, Rosa sensed a change in the air. The birds hadn't begun singing yet. The house remained tense, and Victoria hadn't reemerged from downstairs. Rosa stood and moved toward the window, peeking through the curtain. The driveway was empty, the garden still, the world outside seemingly unaware of the danger happening behind the mansion's walls. Then she heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps walking up the hall toward Evelyn's room. Rosa's body went rigid. She stepped in front of Evelyn's bed instinctively, eyes fixed on the door. The footsteps stopped right outside. Rosa held her breath. For several seconds, the house was enveloped in complete stillness. Then the doorknob shifted just slightly, as though someone was testing it, not turning, not opening, just touching it. Rosa reached back and grabbed Evelyn's hand. Finally, the footsteps moved away. But they didn't move far. Victoria paused halfway down the hall, the floorboard creaking under her weight. It was a listening stance. Rosa recognized it instantly. She was assessing, sensing movement, waiting for someone inside the room to slip. Rosa didn't move, neither did Evelyn. When the footsteps finally retreated to the stairs, Rosa felt air rush back into her lungs. Morning began staining the walls with early light, and Rosa knew the reprieve wouldn't last. Victoria would be more confrontational, more alert, more dangerous once day fully broke. Rosa needed to prepare herself and Evelyn for survival until Andrew arrived. She went downstairs to prepare breakfast, hoping it would make her movements appear normal. But the moment she stepped into the kitchen, she saw Victoria sitting at the table, fully alert, elbows on the polished wood, hands folded. Her eyes tracked Rosa from the moment she entered. "You didn't sleep," Victoria said, her tone unsettlingly calm. Rosa forced a small smile. "Neither did you." Victoria tilted her head slightly, studying her with the placid curiosity of someone watching prey attempt to escape. "Did you do anything unusual last night?" she asked. Rosa felt the question stab at her like a blade wrapped in velvet. She moved slowly toward the counter. "No. I was with Mrs. Hartman the whole time." Victoria's gaze didn't break. "Did anyone call?" Rosa paused only long enough to seem perplexed. "No." The lie tasted bitter, but she couldn't hesitate. "Not now." Victoria tapped a fingernail against the table. Once, twice. Then she rose, smoothing her blouse. "Good," she said. "Because today is important." Rosa felt the chill behind those words. Today. Victoria had something planned. And the clock had started ticking. Victoria's declaration that today is important echoed in Rosa's mind like a threat carved into stone. She didn't know what specific plan Victoria had built toward, but she felt its weight in the air, a pressure so thick it made the house feel smaller, tighter, more suffocating. Morning light streamed through the kitchen windows, bright but cold. Victoria moved through the room with controlled precision, her posture upright, her eyes razor sharp, as though she had already made up her mind about what needed to happen. Rosa forced herself to appear calm while she prepared Evelyn's breakfast, something mild, something normal, hoping Victoria wouldn't insist on replacing it with another one of her special shakes. But Victoria hovered. She lingered near the counter, watching each move Rosa made with unnerving scrutiny. Whenever Rosa reached for a bowl, a spoon, or a carton of eggs, Victoria's gaze tracked the motion. The silence between them stretched until Rosa felt it pressing against her chest. When she finally placed the bowl of oatmeal on a tray, Victoria stepped closer. "Make sure she eats all of it," she said. Her voice was flat, but something underneath felt sharp enough to cut skin. Rosa swallowed hard. "I will." As she carried the tray upstairs, her legs felt heavier than they should have. She moved carefully, knowing that even a nervous glance at the stairs might raise suspicion. When she entered Evelyn's room, the older woman was sitting up weakly, supported by pillows. Her eyes widened with fear as Rosa approached. "Is it today?" Evelyn whispered, voice trembling. Rosa set the tray down and knelt beside her. "We just need to get through the morning," she murmured. "Andrew is coming. He's on a plane right now." Evelyn's breath hitched with a mixture of hope and panic. "Will she stop him?" Rosa shook her head. "She won't know until it's too late." But even as she said the words, Rosa felt a twinge of doubt. If Victoria grew desperate enough, she might attempt something drastic. She might call someone. She might accelerate her plans. She might try to move Evelyn somewhere before Andrew arrived. Rosa helped Evelyn take a few small bites of oatmeal, though she could barely keep her hands steady. Evelyn's appetite was gone, but she made an effort for Rosa's sake. When she finally stopped, Rosa placed the bowl aside and gently adjusted her blankets. A noise drifted from the hall. Victoria ascending the stairs. Rosa stood quickly, adopting a neutral posture as Victoria entered. Her gaze flicked immediately to the tray. Did she eat? Rosa nodded. Most of it. Victoria approached the bed and studied Evelyn's face. You look worse today, she remarked coldly. Evelyn lowered her gaze, shrinking into the pillows. I'm tired, she said softly. Victoria's lips tightened. You've been tired for weeks. That's why I'm taking you to the center today. They'll evaluate you properly. Rosa felt her blood run cold. The center. She had never heard Victoria mention such a place before. Rage and fear struck her simultaneously. She knew instantly what it meant, a facility where Evelyn would be completely isolated, legally restrained, and far beyond Rosa's reach before Andrew ever set foot in the house. Evelyn's eyes widened with the same realization, her breath catching. A center, she repeated weakly. What center? Victoria's expression remained eerily calm. A long-term care facility. They said they could assess your cognitive decline and determine the best treatment plan. Evelyn's face drained of color. I don't want to go, she whispered. You don't have a choice, Victoria snapped. You're not capable of making decisions anymore. Rosa stepped forward instinctively. She's too weak to be moved today. Victoria turned on her. Since when do you decide? You're here to clean, not dictate medical decisions. Rosa kept her tone steady even as panic clawed at her throat. I'm only saying she shouldn't be transported right now. She could fall, faint or... Victoria cut her off sharply. Enough. I've made the appointment. They're expecting us by noon. She walked toward the closet to retrieve Evelyn's coat. Rosa's heart thundered. They had only a few hours before noon. Andrew wouldn't land until later. If Victoria succeeded in taking Evelyn away, Rosa might never see her again, and neither would Andrew. A surge of desperation pushed her next words out before she could stop them. Let me call and ask the facility if it's safe to move her. Victoria froze halfway to the closet, her shoulders stiffening. Slowly she turned, eyes narrowing into slits. How do you know who to call? Rosa froze. She'd made a mistake, a dangerous one. She hadn't meant to imply knowledge she didn't have. She searched for a way to recover. I don't. I just thought maybe the number is on the paperwork. Victoria's stare bored into her. For a terrifying second, Rosa thought she'd blown everything. Then Victoria let out a short, dismissive breath. I'll handle it, she said. Just get her ready. The moment Victoria stepped into the bathroom to run the water for Evelyn's preparation bath, Rosa rushed to Evelyn's side. We can't let her take you, she whispered urgently. Evelyn reached for her hand, her fingers trembling violently. What do we do? Rosa's mind raced. She had to buy time. She had to disrupt the plan. She had to create enough chaos to delay everything until Andrew arrived. When Victoria returned, wrapped in the aura of someone following a strict, calculated schedule, Rosa stepped back and pretended to busy herself folding clothes. Victoria helped Evelyn stand and guided her to the bathroom. Rosa watched helplessly as the door closed behind them. Minutes passed. Water ran. Rosa strained to listen. Then Evelyn's voice, weak, overwhelmed, filtered through the door. It's too hot, Victoria responded sharply. You'll adjust. Anger surged in Rosa. She paced the bedroom quietly, trying to calm her racing thoughts. When the bathroom door finally opened, steam billowed out, and Victoria emerged with a towel draped over her arm. Evelyn followed shakily, her skin flushed and fragile. Rosa rushed to help her sit before she collapsed. Victoria checked her watch. We leave in 30 minutes. 30 minutes. That was all the time they had left. Rosa needed to act now. She needed to create a delay, a complication, anything that would stall Victoria long enough. She blurted the first idea that came to mind. The car, it needs fuel. Victoria frowned. I filled it yesterday. Rosa forced confidence into her voice. I heard the engine knocking this morning. Maybe something's wrong. Victoria glared at her. Don't lie to me. Rosa forced herself to look sheepish. I'm sorry. I'm just worried. Victoria walked out of the room without another word. Rosa leaned close to Evelyn. When I say move, we move, she whispered. I don't know how yet, but we're not letting her take you somewhere we can't reach. Evelyn nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Then footsteps returned. Victoria stood in the doorway again, holding her keys. We were leaving now, she announced. Rosa's pulse exploded. It was happening too fast. Far too fast. But Rosa wasn't helpless. Not now. Not ever again. And as Victoria strode forward to grab Evelyn's coat, Rosa realized she had one final card to play. One that could stop everything. Rosa felt her heartbeat thundering so loudly she was afraid Victoria might hear it from across the room. The keys in Victoria's hand gleamed in the morning light, catching the reflection off the polished floor like a blade. Evelyn sat trembling at the edge of the bed, her coat draped over her thin shoulders, looking more fragile than Rosa had ever seen her. The thought of her being dragged into a car, driven away to some facility where Victoria would have full control, made Rosa's stomach twist. She couldn't let it happen. She wouldn't. But she didn't have time. Victoria took a step forward and reached for Evelyn's arm. "Let's go," she said, her tone firm and disturbingly calm. Her fingers grazed Evelyn's forearm when Rosa moved, stepping between them so quickly it startled them both. "Please, wait," Rosa said, forcing her voice to stay level despite the panic clawing at her insides. "She can't walk right now. She's too weak." Victoria's expression twisted into annoyance. "She doesn't need to walk far. I'll guide her." Rosa held her ground. She could collapse. "I'll help her get ready. Just give me a few minutes." Victoria's eyes hardened, suspicion flickering across her face. "You delaying? Why?" Rosa forced a breath, trying to slow her racing thoughts. "Because rushing her will put her at risk. And if she falls, that's on me." It wasn't the truth, but it was believable enough to give Victoria pause. Victoria lowered her hand, but only slightly. "You have 15 minutes, she said. "If she's not ready, I'll take her exactly as she is." With that, she stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Rosa exhaled, nearly collapsing with relief. Evelyn's voice cracked softly. 15 minutes, Rosa, what do we do? She'll force me." Rosa knelt in front of her, gripping her icy hands. "We're not going. We're not letting her take you anywhere. Listen carefully. We need to make it impossible for her to leave with you today." Evelyn's eyes widened in fear. How? Rosa didn't have the perfect answer yet, but she knew one thing: Victoria thrived on order, timing, and control. If Rosa could disrupt that, interrupt it, twist it, break it, Victoria's plan would stall. And they only needed to stall long enough for Andrew to arrive. Rosa scanned the room, her mind racing. She considered everything: hiding Evelyn, creating an accident, sabotaging the car, calling emergency services, locking the doors. But each idea carried risks, each one could backfire. Her gaze fell on the water glass sitting on Evelyn's nightstand. She remembered something: Victoria's obsession with Evelyn's physical stability. She wouldn't risk transporting her if Evelyn appeared too fragile. She wouldn't want to face questions from strangers if Evelyn looked unfit for travel. Victoria cared about appearances just as much as control. Evelyn looked pale already, but Rosa could make her look even weaker without harming her just enough to make Victoria hesitate or reconsider. Rosa moved quickly. She took a damp washcloth and pressed it to Evelyn's forehead, cooling her skin. Then she wrapped a blanket tightly around her shoulders and guided her into a reclining position that emphasized her fragility. Evelyn watched her anxiously. "Will this work?" Rosa nodded. "It has to." She practiced the words she would tell Victoria that Evelyn couldn't stand, that she vomited, that she nearly fainted. But Rosa knew that wasn't enough. She needed physical disruption too. She rushed into the hallway and pulled the rug slightly off alignment, enough for Victoria to trip if she walked too quickly. Not enough to harm her, but enough to anger her, enough to delay. She then went downstairs and made another crucial choice. In the garage, she opened the driver's side door of Victoria's SUV and quietly pulled the lever that released the hood. The latch popped. To anyone in a hurry, it would look like the car had been tampered with. Even if Victoria tried to slam it shut, the hood wouldn't secure properly without manual adjustment. It was just one more obstacle. As Rosa returned upstairs, she steadied her breathing, reminding herself she was doing the right thing. Victoria was pacing near the top of the stairs, impatience radiating off her like heat. "Your time is up," she snapped. "Is she ready?" Rosa stepped back into Evelyn's room and held her breath as Victoria followed her inside. The scene hit Victoria harder than Rosa had expected. Evelyn lay trembling, her face pale, her breathing shallow. Her skin looked cold and tired, her voice thin when she whispered, I can't stand." Victoria's eyebrows pinched together in frustration. "What happened to her?" she demanded. Rosa responded immediately. "She tried to stand earlier and nearly fainted. I had to help her sit down. She's dizzy, weak, maybe dehydrated." Victoria's jaw tightened. "Convenient." Rosa held her ground. "If you transport her like this, she could lose consciousness in the car. Or worse." Evelyn closed her eyes, leaning deeper into the pillows, reinforcing the illusion. Victoria observed her for several long seconds. Rosa could see the internal battle on her face, her desire for control warring with her fear of losing that control if someone else noticed Evelyn was unfit for travel. Finally, Victoria cursed under her breath and stepped back. Fine, I'll get her something to stabilize her. We're not missing this appointment. She turned sharply and stormed out of the room. Rosa knew exactly what something meant: more pills. She checked her watch. The next flight update from Andrew would come soon. He was getting closer. Rosa moved quickly. She whispered urgently to Evelyn, "Pretend you slipping in and out. Keep your eyes half open, stay limp." Evelyn tried, though her fear made her breathing irregular. Rosa gripped her hands and murmured, "Just a little more. You're doing so well." Then they heard it, a sharp crash from downstairs. Not from Victoria but from the garage. Victoria's angry shout followed seconds later. "What the hell? Why won't this shut?" Rosa's plan was working. She hurried to the hallway, pretending concern. "Is everything all right?" she called down. Victoria appeared at the bottom of the stairs, fuming, her hair slightly disheveled. "The hood is stuck. Someone opened it." She shot Rosa a suspicious look, but Rosa shook her head. "Maybe the latch is faulty." Victoria stomped back into the garage, slamming tools around as she tried to fix it. Rosa returned to Evelyn's room, heart racing. "She's stalled, but she won't stop. We need one more delay." And then, as if the universe itself understood their desperation, Rosa heard the distant rumble of a vehicle approaching the driveway. Her breath caught. Evelyn's eyes widened. A car door slammed outside. Someone had arrived. And Rosa prayed with everything she had that it wasn't someone Victoria had called, but someone she could trust. The next moment would decide their fate. Rosa froze at the sound of the car door slamming outside. The noise sliced through the morning tension like a sudden crack of thunder. For a brief moment, time seemed suspended. She exchanged a glance with Evelyn, whose eyes were wide with both desperation and hope. Rosa's pulse pounded in her ears. Whoever had arrived could either save them or destroy everything. She moved cautiously to the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see. A dark navy sedan sat in the driveway, its engine clicking softly as it cooled. The driver's side door stood open. A figure stepped out, tall, wearing a light jacket, posture confident. For a breathless second, she thought it might be Andrew, arriving earlier than expected. But no, the man's hair was darker, and his gait lacked the frantic urgency she expected from a son racing home to rescue his mother. It wasn't Andrew. But it wasn't law enforcement either. It was Jutair Carter. Rosa's breath left her in a silent rush of shock. She hadn't seen him in months. Victoria had shut him out of Evelyn's life completely, claiming new specialists were handling her care. Yet here he was, walking toward the mansion with determined steps, carrying a leather satchel. Relief surged through Rosa so powerfully she had to grip the windowsill to steady herself. If anyone could help, it was him. He had always cared for Evelyn with genuine concern and professionalism. If he saw her now, if he saw what she had become under Victoria's control, he would understand immediately that something was horribly wrong. Downstairs, Victoria's voice rang out, sharper than Rosa had ever heard it. "What are you doing here?" she demanded from the entryway. The front door had barely opened before she confronted him. Jutair Carter's calm voice responded, but Rosa couldn't make out the words. She wanted to run downstairs, but she forced herself to stay near Evelyn. If Victoria realized Rosa was too eager, her suspicion might explode. Evelyn whispered, "Is it him?" Rosa squeezed her hand. "It's Jutair Carter. I think he came because Andrew contacted him." Evelyn's breathing grew uneven with relief. Rosa moved quickly, adjusting her position so she could hear better without stepping into the hall. Victoria's heels clicked sharply as she paced by the door. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her tone icy. "I told your office we no longer needed your services." Jutair Carter replied with firm resolve. "I received a concerning message. Your husband reached out. He said he hadn't been able to speak to his mother and asked me to check on her." Silence. A heavy, dangerous silence. Then Victoria said, with forced brightness, "She's resting. She doesn't need to be disturbed. You can leave." Rosa listened to Jutair Carter push back. "Victoria, I've been Evelyn's physician for years, and Andrew asked me personally. I'm not leaving until I've seen her." Victoria's voice dropped to a darker tone. "Now is not a good time." Rosa could practically see the tension rising at the base of the stairs. She knew that if Victoria physically blocked him, That would be her greatest mistake because Dr. Carter was calm, but he wasn't weak. Then, with a steady voice that carried through the entire first floor, he said, "If you refuse access to a patient under my care after her son explicitly requested an evaluation, I will call Adult Protective Services immediately." That did it. Rosa heard the sharp inhale from Victoria, a pause, then the abrupt shift in tone, fake, sugary, forced. "Fine, she's upstairs." She continued, "But don't blame me if she's confused. She's been declining rapidly." Dr. Carter responded curtly, "I'll decide for myself." Footsteps approached the staircase. Rosa hurried back to Evelyn's bedside, helping her sit a little more upright. Evelyn clutched Rosa's hand tightly. "I'm scared," she whispered. Rosa leaned close. "He's on our side. Trust me." Dr. Carter appeared at the doorway a moment later. The instant he laid eyes on Evelyn, his entire expression changed: shock, concern, anger simmering beneath his professional composure. "Evelyn," he whispered, crossing the room quickly. He took her hands, examining the tremors, her pallor, the dark circles under her eyes. "My God, what has been done to you?" Evelyn's eyes welled. She tried to speak, but emotion overtook her. She only managed a soft, "Help me." Rosa stepped back slightly, giving them space but staying close for support. Victoria hovered at the doorway, arms crossed, fending annoyance. "She's just tired. Age catches up to everyone." Dr. Carter ignored her. He gently lifted Evelyn's wrist, checking her pulse. His brow furrowed. "Her heart rate is irregular. She's dehydrated. And these tremors, have you changed her medication regimen?" he asked sharply, turning toward Victoria. Victoria lifted her chin. "Yes, a specialist recommended a new treatment plan." Dr. Carter's jaw locked. "What specialist?" Victoria's pause lasted too long. He stood abruptly. "Bring me her medications, now." Victoria blanched. "I don't think that's necessary." He cut her off. Now, the authority in his voice made even Rosa's breath catch. Victoria hesitated, her eyes flicking between him and the stairs, evaluating the consequences. Finally she turned and left the room. Dr. Carter instantly shifted back to Evelyn. "We need to stabilize you," he murmured. "I'll call for immediate transport to the hospital." Panic flared in Rosa. "Hospital? Will that delay Andrew finding her?" Dr. Carter shook his head. "No. He'll meet her there. It's safer. And she can't stay in this house another hour." Evelyn squeezed Rosa's hand. "Please don't let her take me anywhere." Rosa leaned close. "She won't, not anymore." Footsteps returned, fast, sharp, furious. Victoria reappeared with a box of medications, but her expression had hardened into something Rosa had never seen fully unveiled. Controlled fury, desperation, a predator cornered. Dr. Carter examined the bottles, his face darkening with each label he read. "These aren't prescribed for her. Some of these are dangerous without monitoring." And this, he held up a bottle, voice rising. "This could have killed her." Victoria snapped back defensively. "You don't understand the situation. She was becoming impossible to manage." Rosa stepped forward. "You were harming her." Victoria turned on her with wild eyes.
"You don't know anything."
Dr. Carter raised a hand. "Enough. I'm calling emergency services." Victoria lunged toward him.
"You can't do that. You can't take her."
Rosa moved instinctively, placing herself between Victoria and Evelyn just as Dr. Carter pulled out his phone. "It's over, Victoria," he said. "You've done enough damage." Victoria shook, her face twisting with rage and panic, her perfect composure shattering like glass. Rosa braced herself, because she knew what someone like Victoria would do when backed into a corner. The moment before she struck was the quiet before an explosion, and Rosa stepped forward, ready to shield Evelyn from the impact. The instant Victoria lunged, the world seemed to snap into a sharper, harsher focus. Rosa felt every instinct inside her flare like a siren. She stepped forward without hesitation, bracing herself between Victoria and Evelyn with an urgency she didn't know she possessed. Carter moved too, pivoting protectively toward the bed, but Victoria's fury was unpredictable. Her composure, years of polished control, had finally fractured, and what stepped through the cracks was chaos. "Get out of my way," Victoria snarled, her voice cracking with a sharpness Rosa had never heard from her before. She reached toward Rosa, fingers curled as if ready to shove her aside. Rosa planted her feet firmly. "You're not touching her," she said, her voice low but unwavering. She wasn't a fighter. She'd never stood up to someone like this in her life. But at that moment, she wasn't thinking about fear, she was thinking about Evelyn. Victoria's hand collided with Rosa's shoulder in a sudden, violent shove. Rosa stumbled back, her breath catching as pain jolted through her upper arm. She regained her footing immediately, refusing to give Victoria a single inch of ground. Dare. Carter stepped in, but Victoria swung wildly at him as well, nearly knocking his phone out of his hand. You not taking her anywhere. Victoria screamed.
She's staying with me. She needs me.
The desperation in her voice twisted into something almost animalistic. It wasn't love, it wasn't concern. It was control, the kind she feared losing more than anything in the world. Dr. Carter tried again, keeping his tone calm but forceful. You need to step back, Victoria. Right now. He showed her his phone. Emergency services are on their way. Victoria's eyes widened with terror, real terror, but it wasn't for Evelyn, it was for herself. No, you can't do that, she whispered, shaking her head violently. You don't understand. Without documentation, without proof, they'll think I. Her breath hitched. She realized what she had just admitted out loud. Dr. Carter caught it immediately. Think you what? He pressed, taking a step forward. Victoria backed away, her heel catching on the rug Rosa had misaligned earlier. She stumbled, caught herself against the dresser, and glared at them with burning resentment. You both trying to destroy me, she spat. She's been losing control for months. She's confused, she imagines things. And you buying into her delusions. She's not delusional, Rosa snapped, her voice rising with raw anger. You poisoned her, you isolated her. You took her phone, her food, her independence. You made her weak on purpose. Evelyn flinched, tears forming at the edges of her eyes. Victoria whipped toward Rosa with a look that could have turned steel to ash. Shut up. You just a maid. I'm the one who kept her alive, Rosa shot back. The words landed like a blow. Victoria froze. For a split second, her face went blank as though Rosa's defiance had stunned her into speechlessness. Then her expression twisted into pure rage. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small amber pill bottle. She needs these, Victoria hissed. If she doesn't take them, she'll collapse. She'll lose herself completely. Dr. Carter stepped forward, voice sharp. Give me the bottle. Victoria clutched it tighter. No, you don't understand. She can't function without them. She can't function because of them, Dr. Carter countered. You drugged her into compliance. Rosa stepped forward too, emboldened by the truth finally being spoken aloud. Hand it over, Victoria. Victoria backed against the wall, her breath coming in short, furious bursts. I'm not the villain, she cried. I took care of her. I did everything while Andrew traveled and ignored his responsibilities. I did what needed to be done. Her voice cracked, splintered by a strange mixture of desperation and righteousness. Rosa saw something wild in her eyes, someone who believed her own lies so deeply she couldn't separate them from reality. Dr. Carter reached for the bottle slowly, cautiously, as if calming a dangerous animal. This ends now, Victoria. Let go. Victoria's grip trembled. Just enough. Dr. Carter seized the bottle in a swift motion. Victoria screamed and threw herself forward, trying to snatch it back. Her momentum sent her crashing into Rosa again. Rosa stumbled but didn't fall. She pushed back with a strength she didn't know she had.
Stop!
Rosa shouted.
You're hurting her. You're hurting everyone.
Victoria swung her arm wildly, shouting something incoherent, but Dr. Carter grabbed her wrist firmly to restrain her. Enough, he barked. You're gonna make things worse for yourself. Victoria thrashed, twisting with panic.
I won't let you take her.
She's mine to care for.
She's mine.
No. The word cut through the chaos like a blade. Everyone froze. Evelyn had pushed herself upright, her hands trembling, her voice unsteady, but her eyes were clear. Clearer than Rosa had seen them in months. I am not yours, Evelyn said, her voice fragile but resolute. You broke me and Rosa saved me. Victoria's face crumpled in disbelief and fury. You don't know what you're saying. You confused. Evelyn shook her head slowly. I know exactly what I'm saying. The room fell into a thick, suffocating silence. Then, a distant sound broke it. Sirens. Growing louder. Closer. Victoria's expression drained of color. No, she whispered, backing toward the wall as if cornered by the sound alone. No. Dr. Carter stepped away, his shoulders sagging with relief. They hear. Rosa felt her legs weaken as footsteps rushed up the walkway outside. She had imagined this moment too many times to count, but now that it was happening, it felt unreal, like breaking through the surface after being trapped underwater. Heavy knocking shook the front door. Emergency medical response. Victoria gasped, panic ripping through her like electricity. She lunged toward the doorway, not to escape but to intercept. Rosa moved after her, blocking her path again. "It's over," Rosa said, her voice firm even through the adrenaline shaking her. Victoria pushed against her feebly, her strength fading as the reality settled in. "You ruined everything," she whispered bitterly. "Everything I built." "You didn't build anything," Rosa replied. "You tried to steal a life that wasn't yours." Footsteps thundered up the stairs, paramedics with equipment in their arms. Dr. Carter directed them to Evelyn immediately. Rosa stayed by Victoria as the medics entered the room, checking Evelyn's vitals, lifting her gently onto a gurney. Evelyn reached for Rosa, her eyes full of gratitude and terror and relief. "Come with me," she pleaded. "I'm not leaving you," Rosa said. As the medics wheeled Evelyn toward the hall, Victoria collapsed against the wall, her rage drained into a hollow, broken stare. She whispered only one sentence, barely audible. "He'll blame me." Rosa looked at her one last time. "He already knows." Because behind the paramedics, climbing the stairs with fire in his eyes, Andrew had arrived. The story of Evelyn Hartman, Rosa Martinez, and Victoria Hale is ultimately a story about the fragile line between care and control, love and possession, loyalty and silence. It reveals a truth many people prefer to ignore. Real danger does not always come from strangers, nor does cruelty always arrive violently or loudly. Sometimes it creeps in quietly behind closed doors, wearing the mask of responsibility, devotion, or even love. And because of that, the greatest lesson this story teaches is the importance of vigilance, recognizing that abuse can take many forms, and that sometimes the people we trust the most are capable of the deepest harms. Evelyn's suffering did not begin with physical violence. It began with small shifts that grew over time, shifts she dismissed at first because they were subtle. She trusted her daughter-in-law. She trusted her son's judgment. She trusted that the people living under her roof had her best interest at heart. In many ways, Evelyn's story illustrates how easily trust can be manipulated when one person gains too much control over another's life. When someone has access to your food, your medication, your schedule, and your communication, they also have access to your autonomy, your dignity, and your very identity. And when that power is abused, the victim often becomes too weak physically, mentally, or emotionally to advocate for themselves. The lesson here is clear: family bonds do not automatically guarantee safety, and vulnerability in the wrong hands can lead to a quiet, suffocating form of imprisonment. Rosa's role in the story highlights another critical truth. Sometimes the people who save us are not the ones with power or authority, but the ones with empathy and courage. She was not wealthy, influential, or equipped with legal power. She was simply present. She saw what others ignored. She noticed the shaking hands, the sudden weight loss, the missing phone, the locked doors, and the fear Evelyn could not hide. While others believed Victoria's polished explanations, Rosa trusted the evidence of her own eyes and the intuition of her own heart. The lesson embedded in her actions is that moral responsibility does not require titles or money. It requires awareness, compassion, and the willingness to act even when doing so puts you at risk. She stepped forward because she knew that staying silent would have made her complicit. Her courage teaches us that speaking up, even as a single voice, can become the turning point that saves a life. The conflict between Rosa and Victoria teaches another powerful lesson: manipulation often thrives on isolation. Victoria separated Evelyn from her friends, her doctor, her son, and even her own memories by controlling what she ate, what she took, what she heard, and who she spoke to. Abuse is rarely sustainable when multiple eyes are watching, which is why abusers work so hard to control the narrative. Victoria crafted a story where she was the perfect caretaker and Evelyn was a declining, confused woman. She didn't just imprison Evelyn physically, she imprisoned the world's perception of her. The lesson here is the importance of connection. When you notice someone disappearing from social circles, canceling visits, or becoming strangely unreachable, don't accept the surface explanation too easily. Sometimes isolation is not a choice, sometimes it is the very mechanism being used to control them. Then there is the lesson of Dr. Carter, whose arrival reminds us how vital it is for professionals to trust their instincts. He could have dismissed Andrew's message. He could have respected Victoria's earlier request to take Evelyn off his roster. Instead, he responded to a son's concern and a pattern that felt wrong. He listened, questioned, and ultimately acted decisively. His presence in the story shows how essential it is for medical professionals, caregivers, neighbors, relatives, and even strangers to remain attentive. Systems only work when the people inside them are brave enough to challenge injustice when they see it. His arrival at the house became the catalyst that finally forced Victoria's facade to crumble. Finally, Evelyn herself teaches a lesson too often forgotten, even in weakness, even in fear, even when someone has been broken down for months. The truth still lives inside. Her moment of clarity, standing up for herself, with what little strength she had left, became the emotional center of the story. It was a reminder that victims are not weak, they are surviving conditions most people can't comprehend. When she said, "I am not yours," she reclaimed something Victoria had tried so hard to erase. Her voice, fragile as it was, became the spark that ignited the final collapse of Victoria's control. The lesson here is that reclaiming one's voice, even if it shakes, is one of the most powerful acts a person can perform. Together, the intertwined paths of these characters teach a universal truth. Silence is the soil in which abuse grows, but courage, whether whispered, shouted, or shown through action, has the power to uproot it. The story urges us to pay attention to subtle signs, to question convenient explanations, and to protect those who cannot protect themselves. It reminds us that heroes are often ordinary people pushed to act in extraordinary circumstances. And it warns us that control wrapped in the disguise of care is still control, dangerous, destructive, and capable of robbing someone of their most basic human rights. In the end, the lesson is this: compassion must be active, not passive. Protection requires vigilance, and true care respects freedom, dignity, and autonomy, not possession, fear, or dominance. If we are to prevent stories like Evelyn's from unfolding in real life, we must learn to see beyond the surface, trust our instincts, and intervene when something feels wrong. Because cruelty thrives in the shadows, but courage, no matter how small, always brings light. If you find this video helpful, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss upcoming videos. If you have any suggestions or questions, feel free to leave a comment below. I'd really love to hear your feedback. Thank you for watching until the end.